Keep your hands where I can see them. Officer Ryan Mercer's voice cut through the cold morning air with the confidence of a man who expected obedience before explanation. Danielle Brooks sat behind the wheel of her dark blue SUV, both hands resting calmly at the top of the steering wheel, exactly where he could see them. Red and blue lights washed across her side mirror, flashing over the quiet storefronts of downtown Ashford, Virginia, while a few early commuters slowed their steps to watch. Danielle had been parked legally less than 5 minutes when Mercer approached her vehicle, yet somehow an ordinary morning had already begun to feel like an accusation. "Officer, can you tell me why you're stopping me?" she asked. Her voice was controlled, almost unnervingly controlled. Mercer leaned toward the driver's window. He was a white patrol officer in his late 30s, broad-shouldered beneath his uniform, with 14 years on the department and the practiced stare of someone accustomed to having the last word. "Step out of the vehicle." Danielle studied him for half a second. Not his face, his badge, his nameplate, then the small red light blinking on his body camera. "Am I being detained?" she asked. Something changed behind Mercer's eyes. It wasn't fear. It was irritation. "I gave you an order." Danielle's fingers remained visible against the steering wheel. "And I'm asking for the reason." A delivery driver across the street stopped beside his van. A woman carrying coffee slowed near the corner. Mercer noticed them too, and his jaw tightened. "Open the door." Danielle tried the handle, then looked back at him. "It's locked. Give me a moment." "Now." "Officer Mercer, call your supervisor." For words. Calmly spoken. No shouting. No insult. But Mercer heard something else in them. Challenge. His posture stiffened. "You don't tell me how to do my job." Danielle finally turned her head and looked directly at him. There was no panic in her expression, only an unsettling steadiness. "Then do it correctly." The street seemed to become quieter. Mercer reached toward the window with a department-issued emergency tool. Danielle's eyes moved once more to the blinking body camera. A sharp crack broke the silence as the driver's window gave way, scattering harmless fragments across the seat and floor mat. Danielle flinched instinctively, then became completely still. Mercer expected shouting. He expected panic. Instead, she slowly looked down at the glass resting across her coat, then back at him. "Your body camera is recording?" she asked quietly. Mercer glanced at the blinking light. "Every second." Danielle held his gaze. "Good." For the first time that morning, Mercer hesitated. There was something about the way she said it that didn't sound like fear. It sounded like certainty. He couldn't have known why. He couldn't have known that Danielle had spent more than 20 years in law enforcement, or that the city had quietly selected her to take command of a department desperate for change. Most importantly, Ryan Mercer couldn't have known that at 8 o'clock the following morning, he was scheduled to stand in headquarters with every officer in Ashford and meet his new chief of police. Her name was Danielle Brooks, and she was sitting right in front of him. 24 hours earlier, Danielle Brooks had driven into Ashford without an escort, without a city vehicle, and without anything that announced who she was about to become. That was intentional. The official introduction was scheduled for 8 o'clock the next morning at police headquarters, but Danielle wanted one quiet day before the speeches, handshakes, cameras, and carefully rehearsed promises began. She wanted to see Ashford as ordinary residents saw it. The city looked peaceful beneath the pale Virginia morning, with brick storefronts lining Main Street, commuters carrying coffee toward office buildings, and patrol cars moving steadily through intersections. Yet Danielle knew appearances could hide patterns. She had spent more than 20 years in law enforcement learning that institutions rarely revealed their deepest problems during formal meetings. Problems appeared in small moments, when people believed nobody important was watching. 3 miles away, Officer Ryan Mercer started his shift with a paper cup of black coffee and the confidence of someone who knew every hallway inside the Ashford Police Department. 14 years had given him experience, commendations, and a reputation for taking control quickly. It had also given him something more dangerous, certainty. Mercer trusted his instincts so completely that he rarely questioned where those instincts came from. When he decided someone looked suspicious, every movement afterward seemed to confirm his first impression. When someone questioned him, he called it resistance. When someone complained, he called it misunderstanding. There had been complaints over the years. Nothing dramatic enough to dominate the local news. A driver who claimed Mercer unnecessarily extended a routine stop. A college student who said he had been treated like a suspect without explanation. A black father who insisted Mercer had spoken to him differently from the white driver stopped beside him minutes earlier. Each complaint had arrived separately. Each had been reviewed separately. Each had disappeared into the language of procedure. Insufficient evidence. Conflicting accounts. Officer discretion. Mercer learned from those outcomes, but perhaps not the lesson the department intended. He learned that a report written confidently could become the version people remembered. By late morning, Danielle was sitting inside a small diner near City Hall, reading a thick folder over coffee. The folder contained staffing numbers, response times, community surveys, and summaries of complaints from the previous 3 years. One name appeared more than once. Ryan Mercer. Danielle stopped on the name, made a small note, and continued reading. She had never met him. Mercer had never seen her photograph. The department had deliberately kept details of her appointment limited until the official announcement. Danielle preferred it that way. She closed the folder and looked through the diner window toward the city she would soon be responsible for protecting. She did not want officers performing professionalism because the new chief was watching. She wanted to understand how they behaved when they believed she was not. Hours later, as afternoon faded toward evening, Danielle placed the folder in her vehicle and drove through several neighborhoods before returning downtown the following morning. That was where Ryan Mercer noticed her dark blue SUV. To him, she was simply a black woman sitting alone in a vehicle. To Danielle, he was simply an officer approaching her window. Neither spoke immediately, but only one of them already knew how much could be revealed by an ordinary encounter. By the time Ryan Mercer approached the dark blue SUV, Danielle Brooks had already noticed 3 details about him. His pace was fast. His expression had hardened before he reached her window, and his right hand remained close to his duty belt even though she had done nothing except sit inside a legally parked vehicle. Danielle lowered the window several inches and waited. Driver's license and registration, Mercer said. No greeting. No explanation. Danielle looked at him calmly. May I ask why you need them, officer? Mercer glanced through the interior as though searching for something that would justify the suspicion already written across his face. License and registration. Danielle did not argue. She slowly reached toward her purse, explaining the movement before making it. She handed him her Virginia driver's license, then retrieved the registration from the glove compartment. Mercer examined both. The name on the license meant nothing to him. Danielle Brooks. Valid address. Valid license. The registration matched the vehicle. Everything was in order. Danielle watched him walk back toward his patrol car. This should have been the end of it. A brief misunderstanding. Documents checked. Questions answered. Everyone moving on with the morning. Instead, nearly 7 minutes passed. Danielle watched pedestrians cross at the intersection ahead. She heard the distant bell above a coffee shop door and the low rumble of a delivery truck turning onto Main Street. Behind her, Mercer's patrol lights continued painting red and blue across the rear window. When he returned, he kept her license in his hand. Where are you headed? He asked. Downtown. For what? Danielle paused. Is that relevant to why you approached me? Mercer shifted his weight. I asked the questions during a stop. Danielle looked toward the curb beside her vehicle. Officer, I was parked when you approached me. Mercer stared at her. That calm correction seemed to bother him more than anger would have. You have been sitting here long enough to attract attention. How long is that? Long enough. Danielle felt the familiar pressure of a conversation changing shape. She had seen it throughout her career. A legitimate inquiry had boundaries. An ego-driven encounter kept inventing new reasons to continue. My documents are valid, she said. Is there a problem with the vehicle? I did not say there was. Then am I free to leave? Mercer did not answer immediately. His eyes moved from Danielle to the passenger seat, then toward the center console. What is in the folder? Danielle glanced at the plain brown folder resting beside her. Inside were the staffing reports and community complaint summaries she had reviewed the previous day. Work documents. What kind of work? Private personnel material. Mercer gave a humorless smile. That sounds convenient. Danielle's expression remained unchanged, but something inside her sharpened. She had entered Ashford hoping to understand the department through statistics, meetings, and conversations. Now one of its officers was giving her a different kind of introduction. Mercer leaned slightly closer. Step out of the vehicle. Danielle kept both hands visible. For what reason? Because I told you to. A passing woman slowed on the sidewalk. Across the street, a delivery driver looked over from beside his van. Danielle noticed them. Mercer noticed them too. His voice became firmer. Do not make this difficult. Danielle studied the badge on his chest, then the blinking red light on his body camera. Her voice stayed quiet. Officer Mercer, if you believe there is a legitimate reason to continue this encounter, call your supervisor. For several seconds, neither moved. The traffic continued behind them. The morning remained ordinary for everyone else. But Danielle understood something Mercer did not. He had just reached the point where professionalism could still end the encounter, and pride could turn it into something much larger. For several seconds, Ryan Mercer said nothing. Danielle Brooks could almost see the decision forming behind his eyes. He could return her license, explain the misunderstanding, and walk away. Instead, he stepped closer to the driver's window. I am not calling anybody, he said. Danielle kept her hands visible. Then please explain the legal reason you are ordering me out of my vehicle. Mercer glanced toward the two people watching from nearby, and his expression tightened. What had begun as a quiet encounter was becoming public, and Danielle understood that the audience was changing his behavior. You are refusing a lawful instruction. I am asking you to explain it. Same difference. No, Officer Mercer. It is not. The words were soft, almost conversational, but they landed heavily. Mercer straightened. Unlock the door. Danielle looked at him, then toward the red light on his body camera. Still blinking. Still recording. I would prefer your supervisor to be present before this continues. You do not get to set the terms. I am not setting terms. I am requesting accountability. Across the street, the delivery driver had stopped unloading boxes. The woman with the coffee stood near a storefront, pretending to check her phone while watching carefully. A second pedestrian slowed. Mercer noticed every one of them. His voice rose just enough to carry beyond the vehicle. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Open the door. Danielle felt her heartbeat quicken, but years of training kept her voice level. She had spent much of her career teaching younger officers that authority was strongest when it did not need to perform itself. The badge was not permission to win an argument. It was a responsibility to prevent one from becoming unnecessary. Mercer seemed to have learned the opposite lesson. Call your supervisor, Danielle repeated. His jaw tightened. Stop telling me how to do my job. Danielle held his gaze. Then do it correctly. Silence. A cold breeze pushed a paper cup several feet along the sidewalk. Somewhere behind them, a car horn sounded and disappeared into morning traffic. Mercer reached toward the emergency window. Tool carried with his equipment. Danielle saw the movement and immediately placed both hands higher on the steering wheel. My hands are visible, she said. I am not resisting you. I am asking you to slow this down. Mercer did not answer. Officer Mercer, there are witnesses. Your camera is recording. There is no reason for this situation to escalate. For the briefest moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Danielle recognized it instantly. It was the moment every officer encountered sooner or later, the fraction of a second between impulse and judgment. A chance to reconsider. A chance to choose professionalism over pride. Mercer looked at the people watching, then at Danielle, then at the locked door. He raised the emergency tool. The sharp sound of safety glass giving way cut through the street, startling everyone nearby. Small fragments scattered across the driver's seat and floor. Danielle instinctively turned her face away, then slowly looked back. She did not shout. She did not insult him. She simply breathed once, carefully, and looked down at the glass resting across her coat. Mercer stood outside the opening, still convinced he had regained control. Danielle lifted her eyes toward the blinking red light on his chest. Your body camera is recording? She asked. Mercer followed her gaze. Every second, Danielle's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not relief, not fear, certainty. Good. And for the first time since approaching the vehicle, Ryan Mercer wondered why the woman in front of him seemed less worried about the recording than he suddenly was. The words stayed between them. Good. Ryan Mercer had expected an argument, an apology, maybe even panic. What he had not expected was Danielle Brooks looking at the blinking body camera as though it were the most reassuring thing on the street. For a moment, neither spoke. Morning traffic continued behind the patrol car, tires humming over pavement, while the woman near the storefront lowered her coffee and watched openly now. The delivery driver had taken out his phone. Danielle noticed him but said nothing. Mercer cleared his throat. Step out of the vehicle. Danielle looked toward the damaged window, then back at him. I will cooperate. I want your supervisor present, and I want my request documented. You keep acting like you are in charge here. No, Danielle replied. I am acting like the record matters. Mercer stared at her. Something in that answer unsettled him. Danielle carefully opened the door from inside and stepped onto the sidewalk, brushing a few harmless pieces of safety glass from her coat. She kept her movements slow and visible. Mercer reached for his radio, but before he could speak, a voice came through asking for his status. He answered quickly. Routine vehicle investigation. Driver was uncooperative. Situation is under control. Danielle turned her head slightly. Uncooperative. There it was. One word, delivered before the encounter was even finished, already shaping the story Mercer intended to tell. Please note that I requested a supervisor before the window was broken, she said. Mercer lowered the radio. You really like making a record, do you not? Yes. No anger. No explanation. Just yes. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Thomas Reed arrived in a second patrol vehicle. Reed was in his early 50s, careful in the way veteran supervisors often became after years of seeing small decisions become large problems. His eyes moved from Mercer to Danielle, then to the damaged window. What happened? Mercer answered first. He said Danielle had been evasive. He said she had refused instructions. He said her movements had raised safety concerns. Danielle listened without interrupting. Reed finally turned to her. Ma'am. Danielle handed him her license. My documents were valid. I asked why the encounter was continuing. I requested a supervisor. Officer Mercer declined. His body camera should contain the rest. Reed looked at the camera on Mercer's chest. The red light was still blinking. It was running the entire time? Yes, Mercer said, less confidently now. Reed's expression changed by only a fraction. All right. He checked Danielle's information through dispatch. Nothing. No warrant. No alert. No issue with the vehicle. When confirmation came back, Reed returned her license. You are free to go, Ms. Brooks. Danielle accepted it. She did not mention her appointment. She did not display credentials. She did not tell Mercer that tomorrow he would stand beneath her command. Instead, she asked Reed one question. What is the formal process for filing a civilian complaint? Mercer gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Reed did not. He explained the process and provided the address for professional standards. Danielle thanked him, returned to her vehicle, and arranged for the damaged window to be temporarily covered before driving away. Mercer watched her leave. She is going to make this into something, he muttered. Reed looked at him. Then the footage will show what happened. That afternoon, Mercer sat at his desk beneath fluorescent lights and began typing his report. Uncooperative. Hostile demeanor. Possible movement toward center console. Officer safety concern. The phrases came easily because he had used versions of them before. Across town, Danielle sat at a quiet table and completed a different document. She used no title before her name. No rank. No special privilege. She signed simply, Danielle Brooks. At police headquarters, a lieutenant opened the complaint shortly before the end of his shift. He read the name once. Then again. His hand stopped over the keyboard. On the corner of his monitor was an internal notice for the next morning. 8 o'clock. Mandatory department briefing. Welcome ceremony for Chief Danielle Brooks. The lieutenant slowly looked from the notice back to the complaint. Then he opened Mercer's body camera file. Lieutenant Marcus Hale watched the body camera footage twice. The first time, he listened to the words. The second time, he watched the details. Danielle Brooks kept her hands visible. Her voice remained measured. Her documents were valid. She asked why the encounter was continuing. She requested a supervisor. Then Hale opened Ryan Mercer's written report beside the video and began comparing them line by line. Uncooperative. Hale paused the footage. Danielle was asking a question. Hostile demeanor. He played the next section. Her voice never rose. Possible movement toward center console. Hale rewound 30 seconds and watched again. Danielle's hands remained clearly visible. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the fluorescent lights above him. The problem was no longer the damaged window. It was the distance between what the camera showed and what the report claimed. Sergeant Thomas Reed appeared at the office door. You wanted me? Hale turned the monitor toward him. Watch this. Reed remained silent through the entire recording. When it ended, Hale opened the complaint and pointed to the signature. Danielle Brooks. Reed looked at the name, then at Hale. That Danielle Brooks. Hale reached for the internal notice on his desk and placed it beside the complaint. Chief Danielle Brooks. Mandatory briefing. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Reed exhaled slowly. Mercer does not know. No. Does she know who he is? Hale looked toward the report. She knows enough. Reed pulled out a chair. For several moments, the two men sat without speaking. The department around them continued its ordinary evening rhythm. Telephones rang. Radios crackled. Officers crossed the hallway carrying paperwork. Somewhere near the front desk, someone laughed. Yet inside Hale's office, the atmosphere had changed. We need to notify professional standards tonight, Reed said. Hale nodded. And preserve every file connected to the stop. He hesitated, then entered Mercer's name into the complaint database. Several records appeared. Most were closed. Some were years old. Hale opened the first. A black college student stopped near campus. The report described him as confrontational. The complaint said he had repeatedly asked why he was being detained. Hale opened another. A black father pulled over after leaving work. Mercer described suspicious behavior and refusal to cooperate. The complaint described unanswered questions and a prolonged stop. Another file. Then another. None proved misconduct by itself. But Hale felt the uncomfortable beginning of a pattern. The language repeated with remarkable consistency. Uncooperative. Threatening. Officer safety. Reed noticed it too. How many? Enough that I want someone independent looking at them. Across the city, Danielle sat alone in her hotel room with a cup of coffee cooling beside her. Her damaged vehicle was secured for the night. On the table lay a printed copy of the complaint she had submitted. She could have made one telephone call and told City Manager Evelyn Carter exactly what had happened. She could have introduced herself at the roadside and watched Mercer's entire demeanor change in seconds. She had chosen neither, because the question troubling Danielle was not how Ryan Mercer treated the incoming police chief. He had not known she was the incoming police chief. The real question was how he treated a black woman he believed had no authority over him. Back at headquarters, Hale closed Mercer's report and looked at the clock. 7:14 in the evening. In less than 13 hours, the entire department would assemble in the briefing room. Mercer would walk in expecting an ordinary introduction ceremony. Danielle Brooks would walk in carrying something far more important than a new title. She would carry the memory of exactly how one of her officers behaved when he believed nobody with power was watching. At 7:45 the next morning, the main briefing room at Ashford Police Headquarters was already filling with uniforms, quiet conversations, and the smell of fresh coffee. Ryan Mercer stood near the back beside two patrol officers, relaxed enough to joke about the previous morning. He had heard that professional standards wanted the body camera footage preserved, but that did not concern him yet. Complaints came and went. Reports were reviewed. Questions were asked. 14 years had taught him that routine usually remained routine. She kept asking for a supervisor like she knew policy better than I did, Mercer said, shaking his head. One officer smiled politely. The other did not. Across the room, Lieutenant Marcus Hale heard the comment and looked towards Sergeant Thomas Reed. Neither man responded. At 7:58, City Manager Evelyn Carter entered through the side door. Conversations softened. Deputy Chief Samuel Price followed her and stood beside the podium. Mercer checked the clock. Here we go, he whispered. Then the door opened again. Danielle Brooks walked into the room. Mercer stopped breathing for what felt like several seconds. The coffee cup in his hand remained halfway between his waist and his chest. Around him, chairs shifted as officers stood. Danielle wore a dark navy suit, her expression composed, her steps measured. She did not look toward Mercer immediately. She greeted Evelyn Carter, shook Deputy Chief Price's hand, then walked to the center of the room. Only then did her eyes travel across the assembled officers. They reached Mercer. They stopped. No smile. No anger. Just recognition. Mercer felt the room become strangely distant. Yesterday, she had been a black woman sitting behind the wheel of a parked vehicle, asking him to explain himself. This morning, every command officer in the building was standing to welcome her. Evelyn Carter approached the microphone. Thank you for being here. Ashford has spent the last 6 months conducting a national search for the person we believe can lead this department into its next chapter. Mercer looked toward Hale. Hale was already watching him. It is my privilege to introduce Chief Danielle Brooks. Applause filled the room. Mercer did not move at first. Danielle stepped behind the podium and waited until the room became quiet. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was exactly as Mercer remembered it. Calm, controlled, certain. "For those I have not met, I am Danielle Brooks, and beginning today, I have the honor of serving as your chief of police." Mercer lowered his eyes. Danielle continued. She spoke about public trust, professionalism, restraint, and the responsibility carried by every badge in the room. She never mentioned the roadside encounter. She never mentioned the broken window. That silence unsettled Mercer more than an accusation would have. "Authority," Danielle said, "is not measured by how quickly someone obeys us. It is measured by what we do when they ask us to explain ourselves." The room became completely still. Mercer looked up. Danielle was looking directly at him now. Every resident deserves the same professionalism whether they know the mayor, command this department, or have no title at all. Nobody needed an explanation for the tension that followed. Mercer finally understood that revealing her position on the street would have changed his behavior, and that was precisely why she had not done it. Danielle closed the briefing with a simple thank you. Officers began gathering their notebooks, but before Mercer could move toward the door, her voice reached him from across the room. "Officer Mercer." He stopped. Every nearby conversation faded. Danielle gathered the papers from the podium. "Remain after briefing, please." Mercer slowly turned back. The room emptied around him until only Danielle, Lieutenant Hale, Sergeant Reed, and Deputy Chief Price remained. On the table beside them sat a laptop. Its screen displayed the opening frame from Mercer's body camera. The briefing room door closed, leaving Ryan Mercer on one side of the table and Danielle Brooks on the other. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, Sergeant Thomas Reed, and Deputy Chief Samuel Price remained nearby, but Danielle did not begin with an accusation. She turned the laptop toward Mercer. "Before we discuss yesterday, I want you to read your report." Mercer looked down at the screen beside it. "I know what I wrote." "Read it anyway." His confidence weakened slightly. He read the phrases he had typed beneath the fluorescent lights the previous afternoon. Uncooperative. Hostile demeanor. Possible movement toward the center console. Officer safety concern. Danielle waited until he finished. Then Hale started the body camera recording. The room filled with Mercer's own voice. Danielle asking why her documents were needed. Mercer repeating his instructions. Danielle keeping her hands visible. The request for a supervisor. The long moments when nothing on the recording appeared to match the urgency described in his report. Mercer shifted in his chair. "Chief, I made decisions based on what I perceived at the time." Danielle nodded once. "That is exactly what concerns me." Hale closed the video and placed several folders on the table. "These are prior complaints connected to your stops." Mercer looked at him sharply. "Those were closed." "Individually," Hale replied. "We are reviewing them collectively." Danielle opened the first file. A black college student. Then another. A black father driving home from work. Another involved a woman stopped near a shopping center. Different dates. Different neighborhoods. Similar language. Uncooperative, Danielle read. She opened another. Threatening behavior. Another. Officer safety concern. Mercer leaned forward. "Those phrases are standard terminology." "Sometimes," Danielle said. "But repeated language deserves attention when the underlying recordings tell a different story." Mercer looked toward Reed, perhaps expecting support. Reed remained quiet. Danielle continued. "This is not an investigation into whether you recognized me. I do not care that you did not recognize me." Mercer finally met her eyes. "Then what is this about?" Danielle closed the folder. "It is about what you believed you were allowed to do because you thought I was nobody important." The sentence settled over the room. Mercer opened his mouth, then stopped. Danielle pushed another document across the table. It authorized an independent review of his previous complaints, body camera recordings, and supervisory decisions connected to them. The scope reached beyond Mercer now. Hale had discovered that several complaints had been closed after unusually brief reviews. Some supervisors had relied almost entirely on written reports without comparing them carefully against available recordings. Danielle had arrived expecting to evaluate staffing, response times, and community trust. Instead, one encounter had exposed a question hidden beneath years of paperwork. How many residents had complained only to become another closed file? "Chief," Mercer said quietly, "are you suspending me?" Deputy Chief Price answered. "You are being placed on administrative assignment while professional standards completes an independent review." That decision is based on procedure, not retaliation. Mercer looked down at the folders. For the first time, they seemed heavier than paper. Danielle stood. There was no satisfaction in her face. No celebration. Officer Mercer, this department will not decide your future because I am angry. Evidence will decide it. Policy will decide it. A fair process will decide it. She paused at the door. That is the fairness every person you stop should receive. After she left, Mercer remained seated before the silent laptop. He had entered the room believing his greatest mistake was failing to recognize the woman in the vehicle. Now he understood something far more serious. The department was no longer asking what happened during one morning on Main Street. It was asking how many mornings before it had looked exactly the same. 3 weeks later, the independent review reached Danielle Brooks in a sealed report just before sunrise. Ashford was still waking outside her office window, the streets below washed in pale gold as she read every page without rushing. The findings were larger than one encounter. Several previous complaints against Ryan Mercer had been closed without complete review of available body camera footage. In multiple cases, written descriptions did not fully match what investigators later observed on recordings. The review also found weaknesses in supervision, complaint tracking, and accountability procedures. No single folder told the whole story. Together, they revealed a department that had become too comfortable treating warning signs as isolated events. Mercer was given the formal process Danielle had promised him. He was allowed representation. Evidence was reviewed. Witnesses were interviewed. His disciplinary outcome came through established procedure, not through the anger of the woman he had encountered on Main Street. Danielle insisted on that distinction because justice could not become personal simply because power had changed hands. But Mercer was not the only person required to answer difficult questions. Supervisors who had approved incomplete reviews were retrained or reassigned. Professional standards received new oversight. Body camera audits became routine rather than exceptional. Complaints involving repeated patterns were automatically compared instead of being examined as unrelated incidents. Danielle also ordered quarterly community meetings where residents could speak directly with command staff. Some officers welcomed the changes. Others complained that the department was becoming too cautious. Danielle answered them the same way every time. Professional policing does not fear accountability. It depends on it. Months passed. Trust did not return overnight. Danielle never pretended it would. Trust was rebuilt the way it had been damaged, one encounter at a time. One afternoon, she returned to the repair shop where her dark blue SUV had been waiting for a final inspection. The replacement driver's window was spotless. The technician handed her the keys and apologized again for the delay. Danielle smiled and thanked him. Before leaving, she stood beside the vehicle for a moment, remembering the flashing lights, the watching strangers, and the small red light on a body camera that had preserved more truth than anyone realized that morning. That evening, Danielle attended a community meeting at a neighborhood recreation center. Near the end, a black teenager named Isaiah raised his hand. He had listened quietly for almost an hour. "Chief Brooks," he asked, "what if that officer had done the same thing to somebody who was not important?" The room became still. Danielle looked at him for several seconds. It was the question beneath every policy she had changed. "Isaiah, that is exactly the point," she said. "A person's dignity cannot depend on their job title, their connections, or whether somebody powerful knows their name. If our standards only protect important people, then they are not standards at all." An older woman in the front row nodded slowly. Danielle continued, "The badge does not make someone more valuable than the person standing in front of it. It gives the person wearing it more responsibility." Later, Danielle drove home through downtown Ashford. Storefront lights reflected across the new glass beside her. At the intersection where everything had begun, she stopped at a red light and watched families cross safely in front of her. Nothing about the street looked extraordinary. That was what stayed with her. Injustice rarely announced itself as history while it was happening. Sometimes it looked like an ordinary morning, an ordinary officer, an ordinary citizen, and a decision made when someone believed nobody important was watching. Ryan Mercer had thought authority belonged to the badge. Danielle Brooks understood something deeper. Justice mattered most when the person asking for it had no title at all.